Hello, this is Chuck from Above the Basement Boston Music and Conversation. The music you hear should sound familiar to anyone who has attended a Red Sox game or even watched it on TV. That is Josh Cantor, the Red Sox Fenway Park organist, playing for a great crowd at Woods Hill Table in Concord, Massachusetts. But let me back up a bit. We are taking a little detour from our usual format to bring you this very special episode. We hosted a conversation between the illustrious sports reporters Gordon Edes and Steve Buckley with arguably the most well-known presidential historian in the world, Doris Kearns Goodwin. With the 2018 Red Sox World Series trophy in the room, we talked, sang, and celebrated Red Sox baseball while raising money for the amazing Pete Frates Family Foundation. I would bet that most of you listening either participated in or at least heard of the Ice Bucket Challenge. Started by Pete Frates, who was struck with ALS a few years ago, with his parents John and Nancy, and the millions of people who took part in the challenge, the foundation has raised $250 million to fight ALS, which is just astounding. We were truly honored to have John and Nancy Frates join us on that Sunday evening to say a few words, as well as Red Sox great Sam Horn, Red Sox poet laureate Dick Flavin, and of course the Red Sox organist Josh Cantor. It was a very special night, made all the more wonderful not only by the money raised, but by the gathering of friends and family. So here is the epic evening of conversation, song, and celebration with Gordon Edes, Doris Kearns Goodwin, Steve Buckley, and all our special guests, recorded at Woods Hill Table in Concord, Massachusetts.
If you follow Boston sports, you've heard of this guy. He's covered the Boston Red Sox for almost 20 years for the Boston Globe and later for ESPN in Boston. He is a voter for the Baseball Hall of Fame, and he was appointed in 2015 to be the official Boston Red Sox historian. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Gordon Edes.
Where else but in Boston, right? Middle of January, baseball. You know, it's just so cool. I thank you all for coming. I'm delighted to be here. And I feel very strongly about this, and I know the folks that I'm about to introduce do the same. For me, ALS is baseball's disease. Its original association is with the great Lou Gehrig, the Hall of Famer. In fact, in common parlance, it's often referred to as Lou Gehrig's disease. And closer to home, the captain of the Boston College baseball team, Pete Frates, was afflicted with ALS. It was back in 2012. I was a reporter for ESPN, and I wrote an item about how this family had started a website, PeteFrates.com, and the Pete Frates 3 Fund. And I think none of us at that time knew how it was going to take off. Through the efforts of their gallant son, they've raised millions for ALS research and also ALS care. Tonight, the proceeds of this evening are going to the Pete Frates Family Fund, which is designed to help those folks who are dealing with ALS in their families to cope with the impossible demands that are placed on them financially. We just lost at Nesson a wonderful videographer, John Martin, died this last summer from ALS. And I have a friend, he happens to be a country singer in Nashville named Brian Wayne Galantine, dad of 3 little kids, singer-songwriter. My heart is with Brian. But first and foremost, and I think many of you in this room share this feeling with me, our concern, our support, our love go to the Frates family. John and Nancy Frates, the parents of Pete, are here with us tonight. Nancy, could you come up and say a few words? Here's John and Nancy. Please, both of you, come on up. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for having us here tonight. Obviously, we want to thank Gordon and Chuck and Ron from Above the Basement, and of course, Kristen. How magnificent is this? Our story is almost 7 years long. Pete was diagnosed at age 27 in 2012. And I always tell people when they want to talk about our story that our story is the story of love. It's love of a family. It's love of a community. It's love of a city and a state and a country. And in 2014, my son, who set the vision the night he was diagnosed, his exact words were, "Mom and Dad, what an opportunity we've been given to change the world." And in 2014, the miraculous month of August, when the Ice Bucket Challenge came to Pete's newsfeed, he looked right at us and he said, "This is what I've been waiting for." And unfortunately, he didn't say those words. He typed those words. Because in 2 short years, my 27-year-old, strong, athletic, handsome, beautiful son had already been put in a wheelchair, had lost his ability to eat, had a feeding tube, and could no longer speak, and was typing on his computer with eye gazer technology. Today, Pete is considered a late stage, very late stage ALS patient. He has lost all voluntary ability in his body, except for his brain, his smile, and his heart, which is really strong and really loving. ALS is baseball's disease. And if there's one thing that we've helped cultivate and we continue to do is work with Major League Baseball. And you'll be seeing some projects that we have in the works with them this year. But Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy, I need to tell you that Sam and the Red Sox have been nothing but the most supportive, wonderful, compassionate people. They had Pete sign a contract to be a Red Sox player, a lifetime Red Sox player. And I have to tell you, to this day, they treat him with the same respect, dignity, and love that they do with the rest of their players. So what I'm here to say is a couple of things. Ice Bucket Challenge, there were 17 million Ice Bucket Challenges put on the internet in August of 2014. It was viewed by 440 million unique viewers in 156 different countries over 10 billion times. We raised $250 million in 6 weeks. In 2012, when Pete was diagnosed, there was nothing. There was no hope. And whenever you get any diagnosis, your first question is, what do we do? How can we take care of this? This is my kid. Where do I have to go? And all we got was, there's nothing. I'm sorry. He has 2 to 5 years to live. But I have to tell you, here we are in 2019. And that $250 million has found 4 major new genes for this disease. And when Pete was diagnosed in 2012, there were 3 drugs in the pipeline. Today, I'm happy to report that there are 86 drugs in the ALS pipeline. And how fortunate are we that at MGH is the Healy Center for ALS. Unfortunately, a chairman of a Fortune 500 company in Massachusetts was diagnosed with ALS, and he, along with this company, donated $40 million to the ALS clinic at MGH. What this clinic is going to zone in on is a clinical trial design that will accelerate. Those of you who have had loved ones or have been in clinical trials, you understand the cost and the time that it takes from bench to patient. Well, this is going to accelerate it. So how I like to say is, in 2012, we didn't even know where the tunnel was to a cure. Today, in 2019, not only are we in the tunnel, thanks to people like you and everyone all over the world that stood up and said, this is unacceptable, ALS, and helped donate, but we can see the other side. We just need you to stay with us, to help us, and we will make ALS a thing of the past. I know that my son, he was so happy when we said we were coming tonight because, of course, he's a baseball player, and nothing makes him more happy. So thank you for having us tonight, and thank you for your generosity.
John, I hope I'm not speaking out of school here, but given that Nancy mentioned how the Red Sox made Pete a Red Sox player for life, they had him actually formally sign a contract. Somebody mentioned to me last week, hey, do you suppose since Pete is a Red Sox player for life that they might give him a World Series ring? So I reached out to Sam. I said, hey, Sam, what do you think about this? And he said, way ahead of you, brother. He's already on the list. And John's friend got a ring size from Pete, and he will be getting a World Series ring with our players. So how cool is that? You know. So thank you, folks. Well, If you have anything to do with the Red Sox, you don't start a function like this without this man having a few things to say. Many of you with a little bit of a memory might remember him as a very popular TV personality in Boston. I've known him more in his recent incarnation as the Red Sox Poet Laureate. And I mean, people think I have a cool job, Red Sox historian. How about Red Sox Poet Laureate? So without further ado, it is my honor to introduce a guy who's become, in addition to our poet and someone that I do things like this with, but a good friend, Dick Flavin.
Thank you. How about a big hand for Gordon Edes? Bring on the magic, trot out the reward, the prize the Sox won for those runs that they scored. It's the Oscars and Emmys all rolled into one. It's the Hope Diamond, the moon, stars, and sun. It's the end of the rainbow, our own pot of gold. It's 4 of them now, but it never gets old. It's the highest of honors, above all it towers. It's the World Series trophy, and by God, it's ours. We got 4 of these things now, but for those of us a little long in the tooth who can remember way back into the 20th century, it still takes a little getting used to. We're still used to having our hearts broken every year and all the disappointments that happen at the end of the year, and we grew almost to look forward to them, you know, kind of in a perverse way, so that we look back on those terrible days as the good old days. I see Billy Buckner bending, and all our hopes are ending. The ball is rolling through our legs before our gaze. And that horrible truth, when we learned they sold Ruth, those were the good old days. I see Bucky Dent of all guys, the weakest of the small guys, that cheesy little homer floating through the haze. And my heart is at risk. We forgot to sign Fisk. Those were the good old days. I know it's not pretty to wallow in pity. There's nothing of value one can gain. And all of a sudden, I see Don Budden, and again I'm awash in wondrous pain. Was anybody happy? I see Grady Little snoring while Yankee runs a scoring. Pedro's out of gas, but in the game he stays. And there's Slaughter's mad dash, another late season crash. Those were the good old days. Oh, I'd complain and I'd beef, but I miss the grief of those good old days. Thank you, music lovers. Thank you. We had a historic day in baseball this past week. For the first time in baseball history, someone was unanimously elected to the Hall of Fame. And he's a Yankee, but everyone still loves him. Nobody in or around baseball has ever said a bad thing about this guy. And it set me to a poetic mood a while back. You'll have to forgive me, but I get the crankies when somebody mentions the damn New York Yankees. I just do not like them. It's one of my gripes. They strut around wearing those fancy pinstripes. There is one exception, someone I don't blame. A prince of a fellow, Rivera's his name. He's a wonderful guy, the finest you'll meet. He helps poor old ladies while crossing the street. Everyone loves him, although he's a foe. He's top-notch, he's first class, he's Mariano. On closing out ball games, well, it's understood he's the best of all time. The guy is that good. Were he not a Yankee, he'd rate an A+. Good luck, Mariano, but not against us. I got through it one way or another. So this past week has been a historic week in baseball history, and this coming week is a historic week in baseball history. Thursday is the 100th birthday of Jackie Robinson. He wrote a wonderful book. His memoir is called I Never Had It Made. And this is a little, in a nutshell, this is a little piece. speaking about Jackie Robinson. He often said down through the years he never had it made. He was tested, he was taunted in every game he played. He was on a baseball team, and yet he was alone, the very first black player the major leagues had known. All eyes were upon him. Many wanted him to fail. The pressure was enormous, for he knew he must prevail. The racial slurs and insults flew, and yes, he heard them all, but he summoned all his strength to keep his eye upon the ball. Centuries of prejudice, that's what he would attack, and he took the country with him, put us all right on his back, and he was more than good enough. Oh, how he played the game, his running and his hitting, first ballot, Hall of Fame. Because of him, the racist walls came tumbling to the ground. Now players of all colors on every team are found. One man can make a difference, for when all is said and done, this game, this land, they're better, thanks to Jackie Robinson.
All right. Dick Flavin, ladies and gentlemen, our poet laureate. Thank you, my friend. All right. So I'm happy to tell you that we actually have a former member of the Boston Red Sox who has joined us here in the wilds of Concord. This man, in the 1987 baseball season, hit 44 home runs. He hit 30 for Pawtucket, was called up to the Red Sox in late July, homered in his first game, homered in his second game, hit 5 home runs in his first 9 games. Who does that, Sam Horn? Come on up. Sam Horn, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
As I was reviewing your career, and I love that I get to look up at the man, it's cool. There's been so much talk this past season about launch angles and hitters taking a much more scientific approach to hitting. But a guy named Ted Williams talked to you about launch angles way back when, didn't he?
Well, for me back in the days, first of all, how you guys doing tonight? How about those Red Sox?
Yeah.
All right. Well, back in my days, I know he asked me a question, but back in my days, we didn't know the winning that we have now, and people take it for granted. I can tell you as a former player, it's nothing like being a Red Sox fan at this current day and time. Yes?
Yeah.
Yes, but back in the days, we talk about launch angle and all of those type of things right now. When I played, unfortunately, if you look at all of the players that are coming through now or who have came through in the last 5-10 years, you can probably stack up all of their numbers and they probably wouldn't add up to just my 1 year. And what I mean is, when I was playing baseball, you had to prove yourself. Right now, all you have to do is have 3 home runs, be batting like maybe 247, and there's a need for you to strike a little interest in the game, especially for your current team. Well, when I was playing, that did not happen. I had 30 home runs, I had 94 runs batted in, and I was hitting 330. So imagine a player of today's talent having to put up those type of numbers just to have an opportunity in the majors. So when people talk about all of the type of assistance and help that the players have now, I remember when I first came to Fenway Park, this was the size right here of our jacuzzi. Right now, the jacuzzi for the Red Sox could fit all of you guys in it. But that's what winning does for you. But at the same time, I just always tell my kids, hey, I was a few years too early because I was a first-round pick. The Red Sox made me their number 16th player picked in the nation selection. I'm very happy, very proud to be a Boston Red Sox. You don't have a better person than Gordon Eves telling you about history, so I hope that you all appreciate who you have in front of you today. But most important, appreciate what you have today in the Red Sox.
Yes, Thank you, Sam. Now, just to give you a heads up, it was on, did it debut last year or 2 years ago?
2 years ago, I started a show called What Is Your Pregame? For me, I like to be in the game. And I had a chance to get a couple of World Series rings, 2004, which is the best because that's the year that broke it. But then again in 2007. But then Nesson went in a different direction. They started putting a lot of, other people on the show, especially nice ladies. Nothing against them, but I couldn't go in that direction. and they said they were going in a different direction, but I always wanted to be a part of the team. For me, it's all about you get in where you fit in. So Sam Kennedy, he is one of my favorite people in the world. Just a couple of weeks ago, I kissed Sam Kennedy on the cheek, only to let him know I appreciate the opportunity, because he said one thing about his tenure in sports in general. He said it was because of my parents who allowed me the opportunity to seek my goal. He said I was passionate about the Red Sox. I used to sneak in, and he said that was what I really wanted to do. So when I told him I really wanted to get into television, he gave me the opportunity. My show airs on NBC Sports Boston. It will start again this year on April 6th. We go from 11 to 11:30. We're trying to add a half hour, so maybe go from 11 to 12. But please watch us. We are all about what is your pregame preparation. If you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail. So what we do is we like to do it whether it's a mental thing, physical, nutritional thing, and when you add this type of restaurant from the table or from the farm to the table, I got it. That's letting you know right there it doesn't get much better than that. So great job.
Yeah. Thank you, my friend.
All right,
much
thank
appreciated.
You guys. Appreciate it, everybody.
Right.
Gordon Edes.
Yeah,
Gordon
thank
Edes.
you. So before we start our main program, there is one other person. He's been introduced already, but I hope you appreciate just how accomplished a musician our Red Sox organist Josh Cantor is. He's a wonderful musician. He plays all over the city in various groups and permutations and all. And he was kind enough to bring his wife, Mary. Mary has a remarkable ministry in the city of Boston. She ministers to the homeless. 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoons at the fountain right by the Park Street MBTA stop. You'll find Mary and her congregation, a very special congregation. So, Mary, thank you for being here. Thank you for your work. We really appreciate it.
Hey, it's Chuck again. We would like to take a quick second to appeal to you to subscribe to this podcast, Above the Basement. There are many really good reasons to subscribe, but I'll tell you just 2 of them. You never have to check to see if we have new episodes, as they are automatically listed in your podcast app, and it doesn't cost you anything. Just go to abovethebasement.com/subscribe, where we have links to all the major podcast apps, including iTunes, Stitcher, Radio Public, and more. There are instructions there on how to subscribe, or you can just click on one of the subscribe buttons. If you already have a podcast app on your phone, for the most part, you can just open the app and you will see a magnifying glass on the interface. Just tap on that and type Above the Basement. You should see us right at the top. Just tap on the subscribe button and you are done. And while you are there, please write us a nice review. Subscribes and reviews in the podcast universe are an important piece to reaching more listeners, so please take 15 to 20 seconds and help spread the word about ATB. Thank you for your support. Okay, so let's bring on Doris and the conversation.
The reason many of you are here tonight is sitting to my left. I happened to check her Twitter account this morning, and back in November, there was a tweet that said, quoted Robert Frost, another well-known New England poet, who said, "My goal in life is to unite my avocation with my vocation, as my 2 eyes make one in sight. Loving both sports and history as I have my whole life. How awesome to see LeBron James carrying my new book, Leadership in Turbulent Times." How cool is that? Ladies and gentlemen, Doris Kearns Goodwin. Good evening.
Thank you. I must say, I have laryngitis, and I'm supposed to not speak, but I'm so glad to be here tonight. I'll be quiet tomorrow, but to be here and to have talked to Pete Frates' parents, you know, all the guys that I lived with, my presidents, as I like to call them, my guys, they dreamed when they were young that they might make a difference, and it took them their lives for ambition for self to become ambition for others. Pete Frates did that at a young age. And however difficult his life might be, he can go to know from here on in that he made a huge difference in people's lives. And nothing really matters more. I'm so proud my son Michael is here. I walk around town, and because he's such a great teacher, people will say to me, "You used to be important, but my kid had your kid." So he too has made a difference. So I'm so happy to be here. Gordon's an old friend. Steve let me throw out a first ball one time. So it is a thrill for me to be here with all of you tonight. And if I don't sound as normally loud as I am, I'm here.
Well, fortunately, I have Buck to carry the night in case Doris can't talk anymore. We all know Buck is not shy about expressing opinion. Ladies and gentlemen, longtime columnist for the Boston Herald, may have worked at as many newspapers as I did over the course of my career. What's kind of a remarkable coincidence is I was hired by the Globe in late 1996, in December of 96. And in early 1997 at the Prudential Center, Buck reminded me it was at Legal Seafoods in the Prudential Center. I had told my friends that one of my ambitions in coming to Boston was to meet Doris Kearns Goodwin. And wouldn't you know it, WEEI, and Buck was a host at the time on the afternoon drive time show, was having Doris on to talk about her new book about baseball, Wait Till Next Year. Before the show, Doris was about an hour early. So Buck and myself and Doris and Dan Shaughnessy of the Globe all had lunch together. It was my first time meeting Doris. And Buck, it was your first time having any kind of extended conversation with Doris. And you have a specific
I should point out, I had met Doris at Fenway like a 12-year-old. I'd go up to her the way kids do with ball players. I push people away to go up and meet Doris. So to sit with Doris at the Legal Seafood was a big, big day for me. Doris, I still talk about it, but continue. I interrupt.
No, I was teeing you up, Buck, to tell you the story about your conversation with Doris that afternoon.
Well, Doris, I don't know if you remember. By the way, I now work for The Athletic, which is the new nationwide website. If you want to check it out, not the Herald anymore. You didn't mention it.
I can't believe I didn't mention The Athletic. The Athletic, by the way, is a great website.
And so we had lunch, and I asked Doris what she's working on next. And she said, well, I'm doing a book on Abraham Lincoln. Now, this is a long time ago. So my question was, Doris, is there anything new to be written about Lincoln? Is there a desk full of letters or photos? Or will you just take the information that's at hand and interpret it anew? That was my question. And you said, well, this book will take the information at hand and interpret it anew. And of course, I couldn't wait for it to come out. And I was like one of the first, running up to get it, team of rivals. And when I looked at the cover and I started to read it, it was exactly what she had told me. She had basically given me a hint way back when. She took a book, she took the President of the United States, the 16th President, and framed the book through the lens of people who had been his rivals. Montgomery Blair and Stanton and Seward and so forth. And every time I pick up a book about Lincoln or anything to do with that era in history, the first thing I do is I go, I've never told you this, the first thing I do is I go to the index and I see if John Hay is listed. Because when I was in high school, I was such a history nerd. For those of you who know, John Hay was Lincoln's personal secretary, who later on in life emerged as Secretary of State after a long career in the diplomatic corps for McKinley and Roosevelt. And I always thought he was a fascinating historical figure, and a great biography came out on him, All the Pretty Prizes, I think, All the Great Prizes, which I read. That's the question I asked you, and you delivered monumentally with Team of Rivals, and I applaud you.
How incredible to have these two guys loving sports, loving history. No wonder I feel toward them like brothers. It's great.
Well, just like you, and the interesting thing is, and those of you who are familiar with Doris's story know that she grew up in Brooklyn. She was a fan of the Brooklyn Dodgers, a team that, there we go, year after year after sorrowful year would end up breaking the hearts of their fans. When Bobby Thompson hit his home run to end the shot heard round the world, the miracle on Coogan's Bluff, Doris's sister, moments before Thompson had hit the home run, had predicted that he was going to do it. And Doris, in her childlike belief, thought somehow her sister had willed that to happen and felt hatred in her heart in that moment. But that whole experience of being a Dodgers fan, one of the reviewers of your book, Doris, said that left you with an exuberant capacity for hope. What was he talking about?
Oh, I think that's true. I remember, as a little girl, I went through year after year of waiting for the Dodgers to win the World Series. They would always make it close, right? And then something would happen until finally in 1955 they won the only World Series that I ever was able to be part of. But somehow my father kept believing it was going to happen. He had loved them for probably 40 or 50 years. And I remember asking him, is there some reason why they keep losing year after year? And he said, we, the fans, have to believe they're going to win. And the problem is we have this attitude, which will sound very familiar to all of us here, that somehow it's going to get screwed up before the end. And he thinks there was something magic, he said. So you just have to keep believing in them. Indeed, he told me that about life. You have to keep believing in hope. My mother died when I was young. My father died when I was in my 20s. So that they both instilled in me that whole sense that you have to be optimistic. You have to hope in life. So crazily, having been a Brooklyn Dodger fan, having not even been able to watch baseball after the hateful Walter O'Malley took them away from us, I moved to Boston. I went to Fenway Park and fell equally in love with the Red Sox, having had season tickets now for the last 35 years. And I couldn't have found a team more reminiscent of the old Brooklyn Dodgers. But they finally made it. And there's something special about having had, as Dick Flavin said, all those years of hopes being dashed. And then you make it together. It's such a collective experience. I will never forget 2004 as long as I live. I think 1955 and 2004 are worth everything else in a certain sense.
Yeah. When Doris said it's funny. Somebody said it was first love, or love at first sight, when you saw the Red Sox play at Fenway. But in a sense, it was really love at second sight, because you had already fallen in love with the Dodgers. To tell you how big a Red Sox fan Doris became, item in the Boston Globe in 1977. Doris Kearns and Richard Goodwin are furious at Ted Kennedy for taking his yacht from the Bahamas to Hyannis, and asked Kearns and Goodwin to join him on the last leg of that trip, assuring them that they would be back for the last two games of the Red Sox-Yankees series. They missed those games. Doris was quoted as saying, "That was enough to make you want to vote Republican."
He knows these things amazingly.
And Buck, I don't think you were on the beat by this time, although there are those who say that you saw Cy Young throw his first perfect game and Babe Ruth win the two games.
Chris Speaker, Chris Speaker.
Yeah, okay. March 11th, 1979. An item in Peter Gammon's Red Sox notebook. Well, yesterday was a first. As Bowie, in an epic typo, the Globe wrote Bowie Bune instead of Bowie Kuhn. As Bowie Kuhn declared that, upon court pressure, that women couldn't be barred from locker rooms, he issued an order yesterday that all clubs should make their own policy. And lo and behold, the Red Sox allowed women to enter their sanctum, and at 10:01 a.m., isn't that classic? Gammon said he would actually note the exact time. In the 79th year of the club, Doris Kearns became the first woman journalist to enter the clubhouse. How about that? And said our understated Doris, who was working for Look magazine at the time, "It's just another room." Her husband, Dick, said, "All this means is that she becomes the answer to a trivia question 20 years from now." Well, he was right. And now it's 40 years ago. You're still an answer to a trivia question. And what do you remember from that experience?
Well, I'd gone to spring training because I wanted to bring my kids to spring training. So I would concoct articles to write about. So I wrote about Wade Boggs one year. I wrote another time about Ted Williams. But that year I was writing about a young pitcher, Joel Finch, trying to make the team for the first time, and an older guy, George Scott, the boomer, trying to make it for the last time. So I was sitting on a bench and just with the other journalists, and they come out, Haywood Sullivan comes out, and he says, well, we've said you have to go in, so go in. So all that mattered to me really then, none of the guys were in there naked. I had no desire to see them like that. And I'm not even sure, people sometimes say I was the first woman in the Red Sox locker room. I suspect that's not true, but the first woman writing about it was true. But all I wanted to see was the difference between the major league complex and the minor league one, because I was writing about a minor league guy who tried to make the team, who unfortunately gave up 4 home runs in that first game, and George Scott, who had slimmed down and finally made it for the last year. So it was a moment. But anyways, I'm glad that more importantly, that real journalists got the chance to be there, because women had to be there for after-game discussions. I just was what do you call these guys, freelancer, bringing my kids to spring training every now and then. But I'm glad to have been that historic woman at that moment in time.
You know, Doris was, the previous spring, had also been in spring training where she met Ted Williams. Nobody here knows him as well as Dick Flavin does. Ted had this booming voice and a pretty intimidating personality and all. And he was carrying, Buck, you'll appreciate this, he was carrying a biography of Douglas MacArthur. And he knew that Doris tended to be on the liberal side politically. And he said, "Hey, Pinko, I bet you hate MacArthur."
And I actually didn't know that much about him then, but after I wrote my biography on Franklin Roosevelt, I did indeed probably hate him. But the rest of the time I was there, he took me out to dinner, and always he just called me, "Hey, Pinko, let's go eat." It was a great experience to get to know him. It's a good thing I hadn't been a Red Sox fan when I was young, because I probably would have been paralyzed in his presence, but it had come later, this later love.
So, Doris, I have a question that Gordon asked me yesterday. He says, what kind of questions do you want to ask Doris? And there is a question I've always wanted to ask you. Now you are famously known as a Dodgers fan from way back, a main component of Ken Burns' baseball, a famous Red Sox fan, but there must have been a void. This is a serious question. Did you at all, in the early 1960s, for even a short period of time, latch on to the Mets?
Well, my father did, and there's no question that most Dodgers fans, we couldn't be Yankee fans, right? And the Giants had gone, so the Mets became it. I only had a few years gap, and I came to Harvard, and as soon as I went to Fenway Park, I got them. In fact, people asked me this last year when the Red Sox were playing the Brooklyn Dodgers, whether or not the LA Dodgers, this is how long ago it was, would I be divided in my loyalties? And it's true, even though my first love might have been the Brooklyn Dodgers, just like my husband, my mature love was the Red Sox, so there was no question. The only thing I wanted was the possibility, as you get older, I wanted it to be 7 games and end in the 9th inning so it could go on longer, and so the fans in LA would be happy too. But I was happy when it ended the way it did.
Yeah. So I mentioned John Hay earlier, and who just someone that was always in my mind, and I read the John Hay biography a few years ago, and much to my surprise, John Hay's granddaughter was Joan Whitney, who became Joan Whitney Payson, who was the first owner of the New York Mets. So I can go through life saying I met Yogi Berra, who worked for Joan Whitney Payson, who was John Hay, who met John Hay. That's my connection to Lincoln. It's not that far removed. So if you ever meet Yogi Berra's daughter, you're just that close to Lincoln.
You know, it's... as you've noted, Doris, you lived through so much of the Red Sox heartbreak that Dick reminded us of so eloquently in his poem, the disappointment of 75 after Game 6, which was arguably the greatest game ever played, the game that Fisk won with the home run off the foul pole in the 12th inning, and then losing the next night in the 9th inning on the single by Joe Morgan off, who was the lefty? Jim Burton? Rookie Jim Burton. Why was he in the game, Doris? 78, the Bucky Dent game, 86, of course. But after the Red Sox won in 2004, you made a reference to how you had to transfer from someone who once feared the worst to becoming someone who expects the best, game after game, year after year. Have you been able to make that transformation?
I mean, it is an amazing thing for those of us who lived before we ever won. When anybody would get on base in a playoff game on the other team against the Red Sox, I couldn't even stay in the room. I had to leave, like so many superstitious people, feeling that maybe if I leave the room, by the time I come back, they'll be off base and the Red Sox will be up. And I never, even until the last minute of the last day of that game, believed they were going to win. But there was something about that. I remember being at one of the playoff games that we lost, and probably it was in 03, and we were all feeling so bad, and some old guy stood up, older even than us, and he kept saying, year after year after year, and everybody laughed. There was a connectivity. There was a camaraderie. You guys are too young to have known it, but I think some of us here did. I wouldn't want it back again, but I'm really glad we had it, because I think it does make you appreciate even more what an incredible thing the ownership has done of this team. I mean, we are the greatest team in the 21st century.
That's right.
We may have had trouble in the 20th century, but I don't know if young people who grow up now expecting the best have as much love for the team. It's a weird thing. I used to think when I was young, do Yankee players care as much year after year after year as we do? And I think the answer is you do care because you want the next generation to know it, and you still care. But there's nothing as special as being with them that first time since 1918.
So Gordon and I, covering baseball for decades, when we are in the presence of Roger Clemens and Pedro and David Ortiz, it's what we do for a living. So there is no pity pat going on in our hearts because it's a job. But when I meet a ball player, however obscure from when I was a kid, when I was covering the Mariners years ago, they had one of those equitable old-timers games going on at the Kingdome. And playing for one of the teams was Joe Foy, who was the third baseman, the late Joe Foy, who was on the Equitable Old Timers team. And I got very excited to run up and meet Joe Foy. Along those lines, you work with presidents of the United States and like people who are measured historically, globally, internationally. Have you met old Dodgers, and did you have that same feeling?
Oh, I mean, there's no question. I remember when I was a Dodger fan, I finally was able to get, my hero was Jackie Robinson. I'd like to say it was because I knew what he meant for civil rights, but it was just that he was so exciting to get on the base path, and he would rattle the pitchers. In those days, you could wait in the park to get your autograph. Nobody signed for money. And I could never get to Jackie Robinson, though, because he had too long of a line, and I was too impatient. So I finally got to him when I was about 12 or so. And in those days, any of us who were older will remember we girls used to have these ridiculous autograph books where you would write, I will love you till Niagara Falls. I will cherish you till rubber tires. So I brought my autograph book with me, and I got in the front of the line, and I thought he would just sign, and he'd look like one of my intimate friends. But he looked down at the autograph book. I thought I would die of embarrassment. And he's reading these other things. And in complete keeping with the spirit of the autograph book, he wrote, keep your smile a long, long while, Jackie Robinson.
Oh, very
so
cool.
Anyway, many years later.
That's awesome.
It's really awesome.
Yeah.
So many years later, after I'd written Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, I was asked to give an award to his widow, Rachel Robinson, at Hyde Park. It was so extraordinary. I mean, I was able to tell her about my crush on her husband, and she's such a wonderful woman. And I kept thinking, if only my father had known. I'm meeting Rachel Robinson. I'm talking to Rachel Robinson about Jackie Robinson. I think you're right. When you're a kid, also there was a big celebration of that horrible moment that you talked about, 1951, when Bobby Thompson hit the home run off Ralph Branca. So there was a 40-year celebration of that. They had Yankee, Dodger, and Giant fans there. And Gil Hodges was another hero of mine who should be in the Hall of Fame, you guys. I don't know why he's not. We have to talk about that. But anyway, his widow was there, Joan Hodges. And I had talked in my memoir about having won a catechism contest in Catholic school by knowing the 7 deadly sins. And I got I remembered gluttony, and my partner had not. Anyway, I won an award, which was a St. Christopher's medal, a travel, and we used to believe, it was blessed by the Pope. We used to believe when we were Catholics that St. Christopher would help you travel safely, so you always had one in your car. So Gil Hodges was in this terrible slump at one point, and he came to my town of Rockville Center, Long Island, to give a talk when he was in the middle of the slump. And I gave him my St. Christopher's medal, and I was certain he got a hit the next day that I'd made it happen. It turned out they described in the newspaper that he'd been home and had had a young child, and he was finally able to sleep, and maybe that's why he broke it. But anyway, so 40 years later, I meet Joan Hodges, And, you keep wondering, are these memories real? And she said, we still have that St. Christopher's medal. I thought I was going to die.
My goodness.
Isn't that amazing?
That's amazing. That is so cool.
But childhood memories, there's something special.
Did you meet Carly Simon during the...
Yes, I did.
Because the Jackie Robinson was living in their home in Stamford?
She told me that. I hadn't known that, but I met her later, yes.
I want to tell another story that illustrates how invested the Goodwin family was in the Red Sox. So it's 2003, American League Division Series. Derek Lowe had just saved, I believe the bases were loaded. He strikes out Ramon Hernandez with the bases loaded in the deciding Game 5 of the American League Division Series against Oakland. Doris receives a telephone call from Baghdad. It was her son, Joey, a second lieutenant in the 1st Armored Division. What did Joey tell you that day, Doris?
Yeah, he was then, he'd just gone over actually he joined the Army right after 9/11, having graduated from Harvard College that June. And then he was in Baghdad in 2003, and he had traded his duty so that he could listen to the Red Sox game that night, the night they lost. And then he had to switch it to a Yankee player who was coming in from duty, and meant he had to be on for 24 hours or 36 hours, and he had to take with him the loss. So he had to talk to us about it. He was about to go out on yet another duty. But there's a funny story connected to Joey, which is that he became a really, really irrational Red Sox fan. When Obama was president, he had asked me to put together a series of historians' dinners in order to be able to have him get advice from whoever we would come as Jackson, Lincoln, Jefferson, Reagan, my fellow historians, and we had these wonderful dinners that I put together. One of the nights of one of the dinners happened to be when my son Joe was then in Afghanistan coming home. So I went to the dinner and I didn't see Joe till the next morning. Obama remembered that, and that summer he came to throw out the first ball at the Nationals game, and I was there. And so he came up to my son and he said to him, "Thank you for lending your mom to me that night. Thank you for your service." And then he kept staring at my son. My son is holding his hand. He said, "How long do you hold the hand of the leader of the free world?" And he finally looked at my son. He said, "Now I know why your mom likes me so much. My son's ears stick out like Obama's do." So it was an amazing. So then I said to him, "Well, I guess, Mr. President, the ears have it." A really stupid thing to say. So he dropped my hand and he finally went away. But so presidents and baseball and history and Army, it's all connected.
Yeah. Pete Varney, I don't know if you know him, but he was the tight end for Harvard who caught the game-tying conversion in the 29-29 tie in 1968.
Oh, wow.
And he also played baseball at Harvard, and he later played in the big leagues. And I interviewed him for The Athletic, and I did a story on the 50th anniversary of Pete Varney catching that ball for the tie. I said, "Do you have any regrets?" And he says, "I regret that I took Doris Kearns' course in presidential history at Harvard, but didn't know she was a big baseball fan."
Oh, wow. We could have really had fun together.
He was the starting catcher in the baseball team, the tight end of the football team. He made that famous catch. The Senators didn't sign. Then he got drafted by the White Sox and played a few years in the big leagues. And I told her, this is why I bump into her now and then at Fenway.
I'm so glad to hear this.
And I will pass this on.
Great.
So consider it passed on.
It is passed on, sir.
There you go. So I'm paraphrasing a little bit, Doris, but in your book about leadership and in your discussions about leadership, you kind of allude to the fact that one size does not fit all, but that there is a familial resemblance of traits and patterns of behavior that do fit leaders. And I wonder if you could describe some of those. And Buck, as you hear Doris describe them, I wonder if you can put Alex Cora and the Red Sox through that prism that she describes and see if you see any touching points.
Okay. I think it is true that even though each leader has to fit the moment that they become leaders, and like Lincoln may not have fit the Depression, FDR might not have fit the Civil War, but they all seem to share humility, the ability to acknowledge errors and learn from mistakes, empathy, the ability to understand other people and bring people together, resilience through adversity, the ability to communicate through stories, the ability to build a team that is working together for a common purpose, and integrity and character and trustworthiness and keeping one's word. So I want to hear from you guys, why Alex Cora was such a good leader.
My take is that he was unqualified to be manager at the time he was named manager in terms of resume, because he hadn't managed for a long time in the minor leagues. He hadn't been a bench coach for a long time. And historically, baseball used to hire guys that had been around the block a few times. And again, to bring it to your ballpark, James Buchanan, historically, on resume.
Oh my God, these guys know so much. I should not be yelling.
But on resume, he was one of the most qualified people to be president. And Abraham Lincoln, one-term congressman, was on resume not qualified. My take on Alex Cora is that you can't just go by resume. There is something out there that you need to determine in the interview process, and it doesn't always pan out. I don't know what they saw in him. I mean, I'm glad they saw it. It just from my perspective, you take away managing and just focus on accountability, which is what our job is. How many times last year, Gordo, did Alex Cora open a press conference by saying, by the way, I screwed that up?
Yeah, wow.
You never see that,
more,
Doris.
Tell me more.
You know,
and that just, to me, cemented his presence. I mean, the players, they can say they don't read the papers and listen to the shows, but they do. And when they listen to those shows and hear those sound bites, or when they go to a website or pick up a newspaper and see that their manager is accepting accountability for a loss or a mistake within a win,
absolutely,
that gains respect. That's what won him over for me.
You know, you talk about empathy, and Alex wasn't far removed as a player at the time he was hired as manager, 42 years old. He certainly knew the territory here. He'd experienced the highs and lows here as a player. In 2006, the Red Sox missed the playoffs. He was on that team. 2007, he was part of a World Series winner. He grew up in a baseball family, that 24/7 baseball in Caguas, Puerto Rico. I mean, the affinity for New England baseball fans was almost innate for him.
And don't forget that Miami game in the College World Series, where it was crushing defeat.
Yeah.
When you go home tonight, Google 1993 College World Series, which Miami lost on a walk-off home run in the bottom of the ninth inning, and you see Alex Cora at shortstop lying face down in shallow left field. It was the worst moment of his life. And yet, we find out later on, it was Alex Cora who delivered a stirring address in the locker room to his teammates after that loss.
Yeah.
I talked to Miami players, they get chills talking about it. And he was just a kid then. He was a junior in college.
Yeah. And something similar actually happened. And Tom and Joanna, you were there in Los Angeles after Game 3, 7 hours, 18 innings, what could have been devastating defeat. Max Muncy hits the walk-off home run off of Nathan Eovaldi, who had heroically pitched, 6 innings of relief.
Best loss in World Series history.
Right.
It was crazy.
And he comes off the mound. Instead of the team being undone by that loss, Alex Cora, to me, exhibited tremendous leadership. He took what was a negative moment and brought Eovaldi to the fore in front of his teammates in the clubhouse and said, people are not going to remember this game for who won or lost. They're going to remember the amazing sacrifice Nathan Eovaldi made by going out there inning after inning after inning and telling Alex, let me finish this. And Sam, you probably heard these stories. One by one, Eovaldi's teammates went up to him and gave him an embrace. And not your standard little man hug, but, a heartfelt embrace of gratitude and all. And I guarantee you, when those guys walked out of that clubhouse, they felt good about themselves that day. And that, to me, is leadership.
And in fact, that's what they must have seen. Maybe they knew something about his leadership qualities, his character qualities. It's much more important, you're right, than a resume. In fact, just to talk about our present day right now, when we think about who should be the next president of the United States, we should be thinking about what kind of leaders have they been before they got there? What kind of leaders are they likely to be? Before Tim Russert died in 2008, we used to talk about the fact that journalists weren't covering elections the right way, that they're writing about who zinged who in a debate, who's made some outrageous remark, who's raised the most money. They've all come from somewhere. All these people that are going to be running now, there may be 20 people running in the Democratic Party. They've been leaders wherever they were before. We should be looking into what kind of leaders were they? Did they acknowledge mistakes? Do they have humility? Did they have empathy? Were they able to have resilience? I mean, the very things you need in a leader like Alex Cora, we need in this country so badly right now.
So, and to your point, Doris, in 2007, when Alex was a player with the Red Sox, Tommy, I wonder if you were cursing this rookie second baseman in early spring as he was struggling. The Red Sox had this undersized, cocky little second baseman who was struggling miserably. I remember Jerry Remy on Nesson broadcast kind of disparaging this guy's abilities and wondering why Terry Francona was running him out there night after night. And a lot of people were saying, geez, why doesn't he play Alex Cora? Alex Cora at the time was hitting like around 400. Early season averages don't mean that much. But he was hitting. He was an outstanding fielder. Why isn't playing Alex Cora more? Behind the scenes, who is helping Dustin Pedroia more to make the adjustment to the big leagues and encouraging him and telling him, don't worry, you're going to figure this out and you have the ability to be a major leaguer? Alex Cora.
Wow.
Isn't that a cool
This is
story?
Great story.
Yeah, that's a true story. Doris, in 1998,
It's like This Is Your Life with the big.
I know, it is.
I want
It really
you
is.
guys have
Remember
to
the guy
talk
who
more.
come out with the big body?
So, 1998, the
This
great...
guy is amazing. How much preparation! This is amazing that you've done this.
The great Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa home run race is going on. And Doris said, while this was going on, that baseball would help the country get through the Clinton impeachment crisis. 21 years later, Doris, I ask you, is there any way that baseball can help us through our current crisis?
I guess there is something that we can talk about, which is that as divided as the country is in Washington, in fact, they say now that partisanship is deeper than it's ever been before. It used to be that when you had a child in 1960 or 1950, the worst concern would be would that child marry outside your religion, outside your race. A new poll says the worst thing would be if your kid marries outside your party. I mean, that's a crazy partisanship. It's the worst since the 1850s. But it may be terrible in Washington, but you get to communities, you get to little cities, you get to towns like this. Baseball does connect people. That's the point of sports. It connects you across party lines, across racial lines, across religious lines, because you're sharing a common purpose, which is for your team. So, I remember when the Nationals first came back to Washington, I kept thinking, Republicans and Democrats will sit together now and it'll all be fine. All that idealism is smashed in some ways. It's much, much harder than that. But we're here tonight. We're here for a common cause to help ALS. This guy put in so much time to talk to both of us. And we've got to believe that, I'm sure, maybe not that much partisan difference here, but I'm sure there's some. And this is more important. This is our community. It's our town. It's our team. It's our great Red Sox team. And yes, I do believe that it can help things. I really do. We have to look locally. Change in America is now going to come, not from the top. This is now politics speaking, but it's always been a movement. The anti-slavery movement was critical before Lincoln. Somebody said to Lincoln, "You're a liberator." He said, "Don't call me that. It was the anti-slavery movement that did it all." It was the progressive movement in the states and the cities before Teddy and Franklin Roosevelt. The anti-slavery movement made the civil rights that LBJ was able to succeed possible. So what we need right now, and I think the midterms help to do it, more people interested in politics than ever before, more women running than ever before, more young people, more veterans are now going to be in the Congress than ever before. The average age of the Congress has dropped by 10 years. So there's something about when people connect, and I think they're connecting now to politics. We're going to heal this division in this country somehow, and we have to look to local areas. It may take local areas and states before the nation is healed, but we're going to do it. And baseball is not crazily a part of it because we're connected beyond our partisan divisions.
And I will say, if I can be partisan for a second, within our midst, there is a gentleman here who, to me, offers hope for the future. And that is a guy who is as committed to the citizenry of this country as Dan Coe. And he may have lost the congressional race. And I did send a note to Lori Trahan congratulating her and saying, I'm behind her 100% now, even though I did campaign for Dan. But Dan is running for selectman of Andover right now. He jumped right back into the public arena.
Exactly what to do.
And he's a great leader, and we'll be hearing a lot about him in the future. My dear friend, you've spoken way too much this evening. We need to give your voice a little break here. If I could invite Chuck and Ron to come back up, we're going to have what we call the seventh inning stretch, apropos for a baseball gathering. Yeah, we welcome you to stand up for a second. Doris, thank you so much. Buck, thank you so much.
For the organ music at Fenway Park, the seventh inning is the only thing that's scripted. It's really entirely off the cuff, except for that one moment, and everyone knows it's a tradition. I play "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," and people stand and sing, and it's a real joyous moment. So, we're gonna try that?
Go for it. I think we should hear some of that.
Yeah, I'll give a little intro here, and then please sing along.
We're going to give Doris a break here a bit because, her voice is shot. This being Sunday, she did a little bit of the Sunday afternoon news programs before she came here. So if you have any questions for either Steve Buckley or myself, there was one news item that came out today. Mookie Betts, who is in New York today to accept the Most Valuable Player award, he announced that he will not be going to the White House when the Red Sox go and visit the ball club. And I can tell you off the record that he's not alone. But in case you haven't been following developments, the ball club was originally scheduled to visit February 15th, I believe. And because of the shutdown, it's been pushed back to May, and God knows where we'll be at that point. But if you have any questions about our current ball club, anything that we discussed tonight, I think Buck can very probably skillfully puppet what Doris would say if she had a voice.
Eric from Acton, thanks for taking my call.
Touche.
So I have two questions, one for Gordon. I asked you this beforehand. Could you retell the CHB story? That's a softball.
You know what that is, right?
And this
curly-haired boyfriend.
Yeah. Second question for the panel. The Red Sox were not only wait until this year, but also playing to mostly empty Fenway Park. So the question is, if you could choose one Red Sox player in history who's the founding father of what we now call Red Sox Nation, who would that be and why?
Wow, that's a good question. For me, I'd probably say Pedro. Well, no, actually, let me qualify that. If you want to talk about the 21st century permutation of the Red Sox, I would say Pedro. But actually, for me, the guy who birthed Red Sox Nation was the guy who was my childhood hero, War number 8, the great left fielder, Carl Yastrzemski. If you remember, the previous 6 seasons, the Red Sox had drawn less than 1 million fans. In 1966, they finished in 9th place. On September 16th, 1965, Dave Moorhead threw a no-hitter. There were about 1,600 people in the stands. Yaz changed all of that. And I know it's because I still see that season through my adolescent eyes. Despite all the winning in the 21st century, the 1967 team remains my favorite team, my favorite season. I don't know, and this is a great debate for baseball historians, and the stats people would probably argue differently. Yaz won the Triple Crown that season. He hit 326, he hit 44 home runs, drove in 121 runs. But the statistics only begin to tell the story of what Yastrzemski was like that year. If the Red Sox needed a great catch, Yaz made a great catch. Great throw, Yaz made a great throw. Home run, Yaz hit a home run. The last 3 weeks of that season, Yaz hit over 500. And in the last weekend of that season, in 2 games, the Red Sox had to win 7 for 8. 7 for 8. So that, to me...
I called that last one an error. So
okay, that birthed Red Sox Nation. But this golden age of Red Sox that we have now, for me, that began with the little guy from under the mango tree in Mano Guayabo, Dominican Republic. To me, Pedro brought a level of excitement and drama that we had seldom. Every time he took the mound, it was an event at Fenway Park. And the winning, it took a while for the winning to come, although the greatest game I've ever seen pitched, covering 35 years of baseball.
Friday night, Yankee Stadium?
Yes, sir. September 10th, I believe, 1999. Pedro gives up a home run in the second inning to Chili Davis. That was the only hit he gave up in the game. He struck out 17 Yankees, which were the most Yankees ever to strike out in a game at Yankee Stadium. I saw this with my own eyes. By the 8th inning, Yankee fans were hanging K-cards in Yankee Stadium for Pedro Martinez.
I think the only thing I would say to add to that, and I agree 100%, if there is no 1967, there is no 2004, there is no 2007. I mean, who's to say? We're creating an alternate history.
Yeah.
But there was zero. This whole Red Sox nation and your dad and your grandfather and your great-grandfather, that's not entirely accurate. Now, it was accurate for my family because from the time I was 5 years old, my uncle was an usher behind the first base dugout. So I spent my childhood sitting in those seats. So baseball was big in my family. It wasn't big in every family until 67 came along. And as Gordon said, that changed the narrative for all coming time.
Now, if you had phrased the question a little differently and asked me what was the greatest single day in Red Sox history, my answer would be different. 2004, same calendar day, Game 4 against the Yankees ended at 1:22 a.m. with a walk-off hit by David Ortiz. And then Game 5, which started at roughly 5 o'clock or so, that same calendar day ended around 11 o'clock with another walk-off hit by David Ortiz. Who does that? I mean, to me, that changed the narrative from, you talk about that exuberant abundance of hope, that gave us all enduring hope. And you don't have to answer. You can't talk.
This is a question for each of you. 50% of our fan base in baseball is women. Do you think there's going to come a time, and what will it take for women to have now again a league of their own?
Oh, very...
I like it.
One of the most underrated baseball movies of all time, A League of Their Own, directed by Penny Marshall. And our own Mary Pratt down in Quincy played in the All-American Girls Baseball League. And I spoke to her about the movie, and she spoke to its authenticity. It was very real. And as far as another women's baseball league, is that what you're asking? They've tried it. They had the Colorado Silver Bullets about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Tom Satriano, former Red Sox catcher, his daughter, Gina Satriano, played in that team. They played the Boston Park League All-Stars at Fenway and did okay. And I think one of their players eventually hit an over-the-wall home run. I don't know what ballpark it was. But it's funny because I'm actually working on a story in the WNBA right now. And I was just talking to David Stern, the former NBA commissioner, the other day. It would take a real grassroots effort to build it up from the bottom. You can't mandate it from the top and expect everyone to sign on. As we get more women playing, girls playing boys' sports, I think that's where it starts. And it would just have to grow from there. But in terms of a professional league, that's a pretty big undertaking.
I think in order for it to happen, we have to stop giving our girls a false choice when they're in high school. Even younger, play baseball, which is the boys' sport, or you either give it up altogether. Even girls who had played baseball in Little League, you have to give it up altogether or play softball. Well, we have a young woman who works for the Red Sox. She's on our game day staff. I don't know if you know her, Josh, Marty Sementelli. She's a baseball player, and she's a good baseball player. And she played for our U.S. national team down in Melbourne, Florida, when they played a World Cup. And what's remarkable is that women's baseball has taken off and has gotten a following, and particularly in the Asian countries like Japan and Taiwan. They're accustomed to playing before 10,000 fans or more. There's an excitement there. I am convinced that women can play hockey. It's been proven in this country at a very high level. Women can play soccer. It has been proven at a very high level. Why can't they play baseball? So yes, the day will come. I don't know how soon it will be, but we will have another league of their own. You can book it, as Ken Harrelson would say. Yes, sir.
So I'm a long-term season ticket holder with the Red Sox, and I've been a fan since forever. Speaking about the 21st century Red Sox, I was struck by something Doris said earlier about her book, talking about presidents, different presidents rose to the occasion at a different time. Maybe Abraham Lincoln wouldn't have been right for the Depression, and maybe somebody else wouldn't have been right for the Civil War. Looking at our 4 championship teams in the 21st century, how does the panel come out on which team they think was the greatest team?
That's going to be a wonderful debate for years to come. Buck, I'll let you take first crack.
Well, I mean, 04 most memorable. I'd say that 03 team, good Lord, what a great team that was. I have to go with this most recent team just because of its across-the-board brilliance, its managing, the way that it combined offense, defense, and pitching and bullpen, the way the manager used starting pitchers in the bullpen during the postseason. It resonated with me. I mean, it didn't have Manny Ramirez and David Ortiz as big a thumpy 1-2 punches. Maybe they had no 4, but I don't know. Maybe I'm preaching to the audience on the most recent team, but that was a pretty impressive club.
Now, it was a great team, and they went wire to wire. I mean, the winning started this past season in spring training. They won over 20 games in spring training. They lose opening day. They win 17 out of 18. The Yankees come to town in early August, 5.5 games back. Somebody asked Brian Cashman, the Yankee general manager, wow, what do you think of that, how well the Red Sox are playing? Cashman, I'm sure to his eternal regret, answered that question by saying, well, you know, it'd be interesting to see how their record was if they played us more often, because we tend to do damage against the Red Sox. The Red Sox swept that 4-game series. A young man in our media relations department by the name of Chris Gilligan suggested that maybe we adopt do damage as our slogan during the postseason. And then when we ran the table, and no team has ever done what the 2018 Red Sox did, beat a 100-win team in the division series in the Yankees, beat a 100-win team in the defending World Series champions in the ALCS, then beat the other World Series finalists, the Dodgers, in the World Series. That's never been done. So, can you make a compelling case for them being the greatest team in Red Sox history? Absolutely. That said, here comes the but. To me, the 2004 team took the pressure off every team that followed them. And they did it by engineering the greatest comeback in baseball history against a Yankee team that you could argue was one of the great teams in baseball history. And then, you know, we swept through October this past year, but talk about an almost anticlimactic World Series. Theo Epstein talks about how they went through their scouting meetings before that World Series against the Cardinals, who were a 105-win team, and said, we have no doubt we're going to win this World Series. And when you have Poppy and Manny and Johnny Damon and Pedro and Schill and Folk that year in the back end, and a guy, Derek Lowe, I'll never forget, sitting with Derek Lowe before the start of the playoffs in the dugout. He's thinking he's the 12th man on an 11-man pitching staff, that Tito has completely lost confidence in him. You know, never mind winning game. He doesn't think he's even going to get the ball. What happens? Derek Lowe wins the clinching game in the American League Division Series. Derek Lowe wins the clinching game in the American League Championship Series. And Derek Lowe wins the clinching game in the World Series.
Okay, so the only thing I would say to that is that the 04 pennant winners of the National League, that was the weakest World Series team we've ever seen. That St. Louis Cardinals team. Everything you said right up to the World Series, I agree with. But once they got to the World, was there any doubt? That first game was shaky. That was the hangover game. Wakefield was 11 or 10 or something.
And Manny, 2 errors.
That was the hangover game. Let's be realistic. But once they got by, was there any doubt they were going to win that World Series? That Dodgers team looked like a good ball club going into the World Series, and they beat the best team in the National League. The National League was poor that year. That's the only disagreement I have with everything you've said.
Given that I have...
Doris is going to break the tie.
No, a great writer next to me. I got to tell you one other quick Derek Lowe story. Derek Lowe, whose own sister described him once as a male bimbo, was named Massachusetts literacy spokesman, right? So I go up to Derek. I say, D, literacy spokesman, huh? Okay, tell me your 5 favorite books. And Derek looks at me, and Derek's a really good kid. And he goes, oh, man. And I go, all right, 3 favorite books. Oh, no. He goes, oh, man. So I go, all right, Derek, tell me your favorite book. And his face scrunches up and everything, and he's thinking... And he finally blurts out, Barney. And Barney's the kid's book about the purple dinosaur or something. That was our literacy spokesman, Derek Lowe.
Part of the charm in growing up and following the Red Sox was that you felt like the players were part of the team, part of the fabric. And I feel like as the years have gone on and the money's gotten bigger and all that, that's just harder to hang on to. And I remember after that 2004 season, watching Johnny Damon go to the Yankees for, just a couple $1 million more, How do you think that's really affected sort of the tenor of the game, and maybe as it relates to fans? You just look at this as such a point in time. Like I look at the team that we had this year and it was so exhilarating, but you can't help but wonder how many of those people are going to come back and what are we going to have to pay for those people to come back? And is there really that kind of essence to the team that it felt like, at least for me growing up, I always used to relate to?
Well, many people talk about rooting for the laundry as opposed to players because you never know if a guy's going to be in a uniform that long. Obviously, the economics of the game have had a dramatic impact. We're not going to be able to keep this team together. We're not going to re-sign all of these guys. That's one of the reasons you hear Dave Dombrowski talking about not re-signing Craig Kimbrell. As much as we'd love to have him back, the Red Sox and John Henry, Tom Werner, Dombrowski have some huge decisions to make regarding Porcello, regarding Sale. J.D. Martinez can opt out of his contract. And, of course, the biggest one of all, Mookie Betts. But in terms of a player connecting to a community, I want to tell you a story, and it appeared in The Athletic. It was done by your colleague, Chad Jennings. It was his Christmas gift to all of us. During the Duck Boat Parade after the Red Sox won, Nesson reporter is doing an interview with Brock Holt, and they're walking by the duck boats. And all of a sudden, Brock turns away from the reporter because he hears his name. All these kids are shouting his name, right? It's the Jimmy Fund kids. The Jimmy Fund kids on one of the duck boats, right? Brock breaks away in the middle of the interview and goes over and shakes each one of those kids, and they all knew him by name, and he knew their names, and he's high-fiving them and everything, and they're showing him the love. Brock Holt and his wife have spent the last 4 years, and most of the time you never hear about it. He is so deeply invested in those kids and all. So I think there's still a lot of players who care about this town. They embrace this town as their home. There are guys some guys, not many, who live here year-round. And, Buck, you've had a lot of first-hand experience and personal experiences with guys.
No, I agree with Gordon. You'd be surprised. I know it's a football thing, but Stephen Koskowski, who's the place kicker for the Patriots, has been living here year-round for 4 years. And I think if you've been here long enough, if this place, this crazy place where we live, it appeals to some people, it doesn't appeal to others. I mean, we can all name David Wells.
Famously hated
just famously hated Boston. John Lackey. Some guys, it doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means it's not a good fit. Sonny Gray on the Yankees. The Yankees went to great effort this offseason to trade Sonny Gray for the simple reason that they decided he wasn't a good fit for New York. Whereas Dave Righetti, when I was covering the Yankees years ago, Dave Righetti still talks about his years with the Yankees being the greatest years of his life. I lived in Manhattan. I took the number 4 train out from 59th Street, and he just loved all things New York. So it's not about the times we live in. It's not about media. It's about the individual. It either works for you or it doesn't. Now, I do recognize it's not like the old days where, was it Lynn? There used to be an oil company up in Lynn. They would hire Red Sox players for Dick Raditz, and these guys would work there to make extra money, and then they'd go to spring training to get in shape. Well, we all know that doesn't work that way anymore. Players go to Athletes Performance Institute, API,
yeah, Bradenton, yeah.
And they'll work out for 2 months in the off season in Scottsdale before they go to spring training. So because of that training regimen, it's not always feasible to be a year-round Bostonian. But you'd be surprised how many guys make this as much of their home as they can.
Yeah. And one more case in point. You remember, as disappointed and unhappy as Pedro Martinez was that the Red Sox did not re-sign him after 2004, look who bleeds Red Sox blood now. I mean, Pedro loves the city of Boston. He's embraced this as his adopted home, and he's embraced this team as his team.
And if I can just add to that, the game that we do in Cambridge every year, that Doris graciously threw out her first pitch a few years back. We did it as a fundraiser for John Martin from Nesson, who had ALS, and John just passed away a few months ago. When Pedro heard about that, he got in touch with us, and Pedro Martinez went to John Martin's house and picked him up and drove to St. Peter's Field in Cambridge and pitched 2 innings at this tiny little ballpark, the same place where Doris threw out her first pitch. So you got a Cy Young and a Pulitzer on the same mound. That's kind of cool. So
That's great.
It's kind of cool. So I mean, that should tell you about Pedro's commitment to John Martin and the community.
You know, we could go on all night. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming here. You've made this an extraordinary night for myself, for Doris, for Buck. I'm going to turn it back over to Chuck and Ron. You're invited to stay, but thank you for coming out tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Doris. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Gordon.
There are so many people to thank for this. We would like to thank Woods Hill Table for hosting this event. The food was amazing, which included hot dogs, gourmet Cracker Jack, and other amazing delicacies. You can read more about them and get reservations at woodshilltable.com. We would also like to thank John and Nancy Frates for all that they do to fight ALS, and we all certainly wish them, their amazing son Pete, and their entire family the very best. Thanks to Gordon Edes, who took the conversation microphone for the evening and did a fantastic job, and also Steve Buckley for joining us and offering his insight. Thanks to Dick Flavin, Sam Horn, and Josh Cantor for coming and speaking, singing, and playing for us, and also to our associate Caitlin Hawley for her engineering expertise. And last but not least, we would like to thank the great Doris Kearns Goodwin for all that she does and for taking the time out of her busy schedule to talk with us. Please see the show notes and get links to everyone's website, but I would like to point out PeteFrates.com so you can learn more about Pete and his story and also give generously to fight this disease that affects us all. Thank you for listening. To hear more great conversations, please go to AboveTheBasement.com, where you can join us on Patreon, sign up for our newsletter, listen and subscribe to our podcast, like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter, and look at all the nice pictures we post on Instagram. We are everywhere. On behalf of Ronnie and myself, and Gordon Edes, Steve Buckley, Doris Kearns Goodwin, Dick Flavin, Sam Horn, Josh Cantor, John and Nancy Frates, and the owner of Woods Hill Table, Kristen Canty, thanks for listening. Tell your friends, and remember, Boston music, like its history, is unique. How would you like to join us in creating great conversations that inspire and connect? Patreon is a membership platform that provides a way for creators like us to build relationships and to provide exclusive experiences to subscribers or patrons. We have been self-financed since we got off the ground in June of 2016, but in order to continue to fully invest all we can in each episode, we need your patronage. For more information, please go to patreon.com/AboveTheBasement.